Frankly, the slightest sneeze has become suspicious. Yesterday, I was even afraid that I had caught COVID-19 because of a headache, when in fact, I had just spent the whole day in front of my computer. But if, like me, you're tired of panicking all day, the best thing to do is to learn what the symptoms of COVID-19 are. Seasonal influenza and COVID-19 are very different diseases. However, they have been compared for a reason. Both diseases have similar symptoms. Well, we have already seen in a previous video how our immune system works. But let's do a quick review. Basically, in our body, we have cells whose job is to destroy the microbes that get into it. Most of the time, it goes so fast that our body doesn't develop any symptoms. But unfortunately, from time to time, the fight is more complicated for our immune system. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, the virus mainly affects the respiratory system, but sometimes also the nerves. The first and most famous respiratory symptom, the one that makes people turn around on the bus, is coughing. But don't be afraid of the slightest cough when your throat itches. It is important to know that the immune system of an individual varies greatly from one person to another. For COVID-19, it's usually a cough that gets worse. And if it's accompanied by a wheezing sound when you breathe, then you might want to check for other symptoms. Other respiratory symptoms include severe fatigue, shortness of breath, or abnormal breathing difficulty. So, if you've just finished an hour of sports, yeah, it's normal to be out of breath. On the other hand, if you're breathless when you get out of bed, I advise you to take your temperature. Yes, the tough battle between our immune system and the virus very often leads to inflammation. Fever, therefore, is one of the most common symptoms of COVID-19. We're talking about a temperature of 38 degrees and above, or 100 Fahrenheit and above. Fever and headache can be possible indicators, but not the only ones. And yes, it is possible to have a fever without even realizing it, so don't hesitate to check. Inflammation can also cause a lot more symptoms. I'm putting a list right here. Additionally, according to certain studies, COVID-19 can also have an impact on our brain. The loss of smell and taste are also symptoms of the virus. Imagine living in isolation and not being able to taste your food. Now that's not really cool. But what should you do if you discover some of these symptoms in yourself or a loved one? The only way to know if you really have COVID-19 is to get tested. But do you know how a test works? For COVID-19, a test called PCR is used. This technique, discovered in the 1980s, revolutionized molecular biology. It is used in the screening of many viruses, such as HIV. The first objective is to collect a sample of mucus by scraping the bottom of the nasal cavity, because in this mucus is potentially the virus. To do this, we use a large cotton swab. This sample is then heat disinfected and passed through a centrifuge, a machine that spins at very high speeds to separate excess mucus. For SARS-CoV-2, PCR is more complicated, because this virus is not a DNA virus, it has RNA in it. But then, how to go from RNA to DNA? For that, scientists use a reverse transcriptase PCR, which allows to transform RNA into DNA. Honestly, it's a bit like cooking a recipe, but it would take a long time to describe this experiment in full. Once the DNA is made, the machine, under the effect of successive changes of temperature, will carry out the PCR. This consists in multiplying the RNA sequence thousands of times, in order to more easily detect 3 specific genes related to the coronavirus. During this test, you will also be asked to give the names of people you have met a week before the onset of symptoms and the places you have been. Why? Simply because these people are potential carriers of the disease without even knowing it. After all, I could have passed it on to them. Research is still ongoing, but it is currently estimated that it is possible to be contagious 48 hours before the onset of symptoms. But also, carriers of the virus can be asymptomatic. You know, those people that are infected but have no symptoms? Because yes, symptomatic equals presence of symptoms, and asymptomatic equals no symptoms. It's as simple as that. But be careful. Even if you're asymptomatic, you can still transmit the virus. You must therefore remain very vigilant. So, why are some people asymptomatic? Well, scientists don't really know. The truth is that not everyone's immune system is the same. You probably know someone that gets sick all the time, while others never do. But let's get back on topic. Now we know the symptoms of COVID-19, but what are the risks? So, let's be clear. The vast majority of people with COVID-19 will only end up being sick for about a week. On the other hand, the risks increase for so-called vulnerable people. Respiratory difficulties can lead to hospitalization and even death. But what about them? Who are these vulnerable people? Well, people who are obese, have chronic health problems, are immunocompromised, or that are undergoing treatment that weakens their immune system. People over 60 years of age should be given attention as well. These people should avoid going out as much as possible during the pandemic. And if you want to help them, you can. For example, offer to do the shopping or simply call and check on them. Now you know everything about the symptoms of COVID-19, its risks, and how the PCR test works. And above all, when it comes to COVID-19, protect yourself and others. Bye!